Well, friends, you picked a good one. Today, we jump into the book of Revelation. We are in the middle of a series called Jesus Politics. And for the next several episodes, we're going to do some bird's eye view stuff with Revelation because it always comes up during political seasons. And so it should. And we're going to talk about why it comes up and all of those things. But before we do, I wanted to let you know about a cool conference that's coming up. It's an online conference. It's called Christ Among the Disciplines, an online interdisciplinary conference on Christology. It's going to be from November 18th through the 25th, and you're going to be able to hear from 70 world-leading scholars in biblical studies, theology, and philosophy. And they're going to be presenting lectures, and there's going to be 16 different book panels on recent publications regarding Christology. So it's going to be really awesome. Some voices that I am looking forward to hearing are past guests on our show. Of course, we've got N.T. Wright is part of this, J.R. Daniel Kirk is part of this, and Lucy Peppiette is part of this, and so many more voices that I already know are going to be really, really important. So if you want to be part of this event, go to ChristAmongTheDisciplines.com and you can sign up there. It's ChristAmongTheDisciplines.com. I highly encourage you to check it out. If you have any interest in theology, this thing is going to be cool. All right, my friends, let's step into the episode.
Welcome to Theology Curator, a podcast hosted by Kurt Willems and available online at theologycurator.com. Each episode looks at a theological, formational, or cultural theme. We might dig into the life and letters of a radical Jewish teacher named Paul, converse about a pressing contemporary issue, reflect on the nature of following Jesus today, or even attempt to remedy doom and gloom preaching with a good old-fashioned dose of hope. This show is an invitation to build bridges between the first century world of the earliest Christ followers into the 21st century reality we now inhabit. The Jesus we excavate from the rubble of tradition might just surprise us all.
Welcome back to another edition of Jesus Politics. I'm Kurt Willems, the host of Theology Curator, excited to be with you again. We are near an election. If you're listening to this after the election, I think it's still relevant because at the end of the day, political realities are always going to be something we as Christians have to navigate, whether we're under oppression and sorts of regimes like the early church often was, or we're in a place called the United States of America where there's oppression that often is pushed to the margins and not seen unless someone happens to have a video camera. So we are stepping in to something that is, I believe, relevant until Jesus comes back. And that's where we're going to go today, my friends. We're going to talk about when Jesus comes back, sort of. Well, what we're actually going to do is move towards a few sort of big picture reflections on the book of Revelation and end times ideas in general. Why are we doing this? Well, if you've been around the block in any Christian sphere, especially more evangelical, charismatic, traditional, whatever word fits, you know what I'm talking about. You know that there are certain types of expressions of Christianity that go all in on a particular reading of Revelation. And this has huge ramifications. For instance, there is a system of theology called dispensationalism. Now, I don't want to claim that this is only one sort of system. There's actually dispensationalisms, so we got to be clear about that and honest about that. But I'm going to speak in generalities just for the sake of brevity. In dispensational thought, there's this idea that there are two distinct peoples of God. Now, in one sense, this isn't a big deal. In one sense, to affirm that the people of Jewish descent that are faithfully in covenant with the God of Israel from the scriptures and beyond, that I have actually personally don't have a huge problem recognizing that these are people in fidelity with God insofar that they understand God, although according to Romans chapters 9 through 11, a day will come when many will turn back and see see that Jesus actually is the Messiah. So on the last day, because I do believe in a second coming, I do believe a day is coming when Jesus returns in some way, shape, or form, there will be a mass awareness of Jewish folks, according to Paul, that will finally recognize Jesus as Lord and Messiah and ultimately as the embodiment of Israel's God. So in one sense, this is actually okay because when we think about eschatology, which is a word that really just means the study of the things of the end. I often think of it as the things leading to the end because it's not just about over there. It's actually hugely important that we think about over here, the present. And we'll talk a lot about that too, probably. Okay, these have been tangents. Here's what I'm trying to say. That in dispensational thought, the idea is that there is two distinct peoples of God. There are those who compose the church, mostly Gentile followers of Jesus, and then there are those who compose Israel. And there are two tracks that are leading towards an eschatological end that will culminate in a tribulation, a period of several Jews becoming saved by Jesus, the rebuilding of the temple, the rise of the Antichrist, and a lot of these sorts of things. And the idea of dispensationalism really is rooted in something called literalism. And really what happens is some people come to the Bible and they try to extract meaning by reading it in its English version often, not always. Some people have use of the languages, of course. But what ends up happening is how it sounds to us is what it means. Now, again, I'm having to be very simplistic because of time, but essentially, if it sounds like something massively apocalyptic is going to happen, like if the sun and the stars are being shaken and melted and elements are melting in on themselves, all of that is taken literally. A time will come when the cosmic forces will literally shake and be destroyed, and calamity will happen to the point where everything's destroyed. Now, I have a problem with that approach because I don't think that every part of the Bible is meant to be literally if we just mean how it sounds is what it is. Literal in the sense of we take very seriously the genre and situation of the author writing, then yeah, if that's what you mean by literal, cool. But literal in the sense that what it says is what it means, and that's what we get, that's very dangerous. And what we've seen as a result of certain versions, again, not all dispensationalists would agree with this, but certain versions of dispensationalism, and now I'm going to tie us back to politics, we have seen a couple of things. We have seen this interest in how political events are going to lead to the coming of Jesus. And that's a big problem. And what's always fascinating to me is that in this system, the United States tends to be the good guy, especially if we have a conservative president, right? Yeah, it's very interesting. Another ramification, going back to our two peoples of God idea, is that the way the United States treats the modern state of Israel in this viewpoint is hugely significant. Because if there are two peoples of God, which, by the way, I affirm in a certain way, but then if we add to this idea that there is a coming rapture, there's a coming tribulation period, and being on the side of Israel is important because of all of those factors, then we get really messy really fast, especially if you think the temple needs to be rebuilt, the land needs to be returned to the Jewish people. It just gets really messy because then we find ourselves in a situation where massive amounts of evangelical Christians and fundamentalist Christians are supporting policies from the United States that allow for power to be brokered for the state of Israel. But often what we've seen is that that's led to the oppression of Palestinian people. Many times we've seen this. And this is a huge problem because what we don't often hear is that the people that are being oppressed in the West Bank, in Gaza, Some of them are Palestinian Jesus people. Some of them are followers of Jesus, and they're sitting there in their oppressed imperial situation where Israel has come in and taken land and these sorts of things, and the United States has really propped that up. And what has happened, my friends? I'll tell you what's happened. In the process, we have these Palestinian Christian sisters and brothers who are saying, do you not see us as your family? Do you not see us suffering? Why don't you listen to our voice? Why don't you listen to our perspective? And friends, so often, this is the problem. We who are especially white Christian evangelical types have historically only listened to those voices that prop up our vision of what God's master plan for the universe is, including ignoring the voices of the suffering Palestinian sisters and brothers. But also, we do it here in the United States often. We're tempted to ignore evangelical voices of people of color. You know, I've heard several different voices. I think of people even like Tony Evans. I mean, an amazing pastor, conservative Christian man that's been admired for years. And when he starts talking about systemic racism, when he starts talking about we have a race problem in America, why aren't people listening? You know, well, part of it is that we need to do some important reflective work. Okay, so that's my grand introduction. And that's just a couple of ways that revelation tends to come into the conversation. Let me give you a couple of quick other examples. Now we have a pandemic, right? We're in the middle of a pandemic. And of course, it's been politicized. Of course, there is two extremes. One extreme would be we don't trust even a vaccine. We think this whole pandemic was planned and it's using behind the scenes manipulation to create a situation that's politically advantageous for the power brokers, especially those liberal power brokers. That would be one extreme. The other extreme, of course, is the hyper sort of impulse to hide and, live in fear, I suppose. That could be an extreme. And then there's what the doctors and the scientists have been saying, that this virus is a big deal. And we need to take it seriously. We don't need to be afraid if we actually put into place the cautionary things that can make a big difference. Now, here's where it comes back to Revelation and the end times. I have heard many people share about people who are saying things like, well, remember the Bill Gates thing? Bill Gates somehow is going to put microchips in these vaccines, and we should be worried about this because it's probably something like what Revelation speaks of as a mark of the beast. Okay, so again, another politically loaded situation that has come back to the book of Revelation. I think that when it really boils down, we need a new vision or maybe a renewed vision of what Revelation is trying to do. And so what I hope to accomplish, I'm not going to be able to accomplish a ton in these episodes, but I want to give just a few preliminary thoughts about how we frame the conversation around Revelation, especially as it pertains to politics. And then what I hope to do is sometime in the future actually have a very long extended series just about Revelation and the end times here on the Theology Curator podcast. So that will be coming in the future as well. So let's step in. What is Revelation? Well, here's a slogan that I developed a few years ago that I've been using in various ways. And this is, for me, the heartbeat of what Revelation is doing. It is a revelation of Jesus to John for the church against the empire during the first century. So what am I trying to say here? Well, I think at first I want to just say it is a revelation. What is a revelation? Well, it is a book that is meant to reveal or unveil something about reality. Now, we know that John of Patmos is the author, and we know that this John has been exiled to an island where he's probably doing some manual labor. He's probably gotten in trouble with local authorities. We don't know the full context, but he is in trouble for talking about Jesus in the region of Asia Minor, which is modern-day Turkey. And when this is happening, he is praying, he is having a moment, and then all of a sudden, he has a revelation. And thus the book is called Revelation or Apocalypse, a revealing. So this book is something that God revealed to John. So it is a revelation. It is a revelation of Jesus. So this is huge too. So the book of Revelation reveals Jesus. I think we often miss this so much. We make Revelation about a different Jesus. And in fact, I would venture to say that Revelation often gives Jesus a bad name because of the way it's framed. Jesus becomes a violent guy who's ready to come and conquer people. He's got a sword. He's got a tattoo on his leg. This is not the purpose of the imagery in Revelation. It is meant to reveal the same Jesus that we read about in Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Jesus doesn't magically change his tone, doesn't magically change his posture of love and sacrificial self-offering. This is the same Jesus who walks the road to the cross for the enemies who put him up there, and the same Jesus who has risen from the dead. So foundationally, I hope we can understand this book is a revelation of Jesus, and that revelation happens to John. And it is something that is for the church. So it's not meant to simply be for John. John has a private devotional moment for the sake of the community. It is for the church, and specifically during the first century, but it is for the church for all times because it's in the scriptures. It is also a revelation that is against the empire. It's against the Roman Empire, and it's against any other empire that comes after it, insofar that empires oppress people. And we see all kinds of ways that comes up. And it is something that is rooted, as I've said, during the first century. Revelation actually starts affirming this impulse or this slogan that I've already shared. It starts with these words, the revelation of Jesus Christ. So that's where we have to anchor all of our interpretation of a book like this. Otherwise, it becomes a book that is used and abused and creates all kinds of systems of evil and oppression, as we have seen throughout history. And so what do we have when we look at it? Well, here's something that I think is important to note, that when we're understanding the way it communicates, that we have this sense that God the Father is communicating through Jesus the Son, through an angel to John. I mean, this is a mystical experience, and it uses mystical apocalyptic language to communicate something about Jesus. So, how do we handle this? Well, again, as way of introduction to understanding some stuff in Revelation, I think Eugene Peterson, the late Eugene Peterson, the author of The Message and so many other important books, he has a book called Reverse Thunder and says it this way. He says, he compares John to a poet, someone who is engaging something as he is having this vision and then writing it down. And this is what Eugene Peterson says in that context. He says, look, a poet uses words not to explain something and not to describe something, but to make something. Poet in Greek means maker. Poetry is not the language of objective explanation, but the language of imagination. It makes an image of reality in such a way as to invite our participation in it. And so what we're going to see in Revelation is a letter, actually a bunch of letters. It's a circular letter in a sense, right? That is so image saturated that it's inviting us to step into the poetic nature, the beauty, the painting that John is going to put onto the biblical canvas for us to engage. And that's really important, especially when we go back to my point about literalism. Is this something that engages the imagination in such a way as to invite us to join Jesus in something that's bigger than what a literal interpretation would often make of it? Or do we just take the words as they sound and kind of take our own meaning from them? And Eugene Peterson, I think, wisely says, no, we're invited to participate in this image-saturated book because by its nature, it is something that is made to engage our imaginations and to invite us into a different way of living as a people of God. And so that's what I want to make sure we have a sense of as we step into the book of Revelation and make some connections to the way that it is indeed political. Like I said, these are going to be short little reflections, and I'm not going to be able to go deep into this passage or that passage in a situation like this. But again, I want to spur you on towards some thoughts, point you towards some resources, and hopefully we can at least have a foundational space from which to engage political conversation with fellow sisters and brothers in Jesus who perhaps have a different understanding of Revelation and often how that kind of trickles into their political ideas. And so maybe if we have a foundation to stand on together, we may not have all the answers. And maybe that's something we have to admit in conversations sometimes. Or, hey, I'm not sure, but I can track it down. I think that's got to be our posture so much more. So when we're in the book of Revelation, hopefully I give you at least that much. And then the resources to go track ideas down if you need them. So what do I want to end with? I want to end with this thought. That John's revelation of Jesus steps into a specific storyline and genre called apocalyptic resistance literature. So this is, in fact, a letter. It's written to 7 churches. It is, in fact, a prophecy. It's revealing something mostly about the first century realities, but ultimately, within all of that, it is apocalyptic literature. And this is a form of literature that became popular. You see some of it in the Hebrew scriptures. You see it in Daniel especially, and a few places elsewhere in the prophets. But it really takes full form during that period, the couple of 100 years before and then about 100 years after the time of Jesus. And apocalyptic literature was a way of using cryptic symbols and images and trying to just get people to consider their context and how to engage it when, God seems distant. What do we do? And can we name the evils that are being imposed upon us by these foreign enemies, these empires? And so when John takes this up as a Jewish man who is following Jesus, he's taking it up and subverting its imagery and saying, hey, I want you to see Jesus in this apocalypse. And so he is going to give us a bunch of imagery. He's going to give us a bunch of clues, a bunch of cryptic sayings that are really hard to understand. But ultimately, he wants us to know he has stepped into something that says, look, I know there's empires around that are claiming that they run the world, but you need to know that there is a God behind the curtain who looks like a slaughtered lamb, who actually is in charge of this thing. And when it's all said and done, this God is going to make all things new. Well, friends, that's the introduction. I hope it just piques some curiosity and invites us to consider how we read Revelation and then consider if it changes some of the political discourse that we often find in the church in the United States and beyond.
Thanks for listening to Theology Curator. For more resources from Kurt Willems, check out theologycurator.com/newsletter to sign up for our email update list. For new listeners of the podcast, we hope you will subscribe via iTunes, Google, or your podcast manager of choice. If you like what you hear, please leave the show a review. For regular listeners, consider supporting Kurt's online ministry at patreon.com/Kurt Willems. Lastly, please don't let this conversation end when the episode is over. We hope you feel empowered in regular life to explore theology and faith in intelligent and humanizing ways.